$850 billion. That is the current projected military budget for 2025, which makes it one of the largest amounts of money that the US spends. So what if one day all of that money was suddenly transferred to the Federal Transit Administration? What could US Transit do with all of that cash? Well, in this video, we will examine what different transit extensions and improvements US cities can get with $850 billion. With that being said, let's begin. Before we begin, we need to find ways to get construction costs down. The Effective Transit Alliance has a great study on this, so link below if you want to read it. But I will summarize what we're going to do. First, we are going to avoid contractors and try to do much of the work ourselves. This means hiring experienced planners, construction crews, and experts to work for the transit agency directly. A ton of the cost overruns was due to bureaucracy and a lack of cooperation between contractors. But by getting rid of that and having everything done in-house, all procedures are unified, which means if there is a problem, it gets fixed right away. Also, if we do end up using contractors, bidding will be made public and competitive, and all budgets will be itemized and publicized. And finally, we need knowledge, as decades of inaction means relearning many of the crucial aspects of how to build trains. But with this massive building spree, a ton of knowledge will be gained, which will satisfy this aspect of the equation. So with this, the cost savings will be immense. But what is the cost reduction? Well, the Effective Transit Alliance also says that it can be up to 90%. But I think this is a little too optimistic. However, 40 to 50% seems low, considering how much Spain and France pay for their train lines. It also does not help that we have very little precedent for cost savings, and the budgets online I found are pretty vague. So if there are some examples of successful cost savings, please enlighten me in the comments below. But for the purposes of this video, I am going to say that we're going to save about 60% by implementing the recommendations of the Effective Transit Alliance. That seems like a good middle ground between what Europe pays and the insane costs of the US, albeit on the lower end. But please keep in mind that this is just a basic cost estimate and is only used for the purposes of this video to keep track of what we are spending. So don't treat this as a concrete fact. Now, let's start in New York City, and I am going to be biased in favor of New York City because 1, I live here, and 2, New York City's transit ridership is bigger than all of the other subway systems combined. But even so, I won't spend more than 15% of our budget. As for our costs, we will make the subways cost $840 million per mile, based on Phase 1 of 2nd Avenue, and elevateds will cost $160 million per mile, based on the JFK AirTrain. So, what can we pay for? Let's start with what we have in our shortlist. The 2nd Avenue subway will get 4 tracks from Houston Street to 63rd Street, but under the first phase of the shortlist, only 2 of them will be in use. The 3rd and 4th tracks will serve as storage track until later. To the north, the line will go via 125th Street to 137th Street, City College. To the south, the line will follow Phase 4. This project will cost around $12 billion under our new cost estimates. The Utica Avenue subway will be built as a branch off of the Eastern Parkway line and run to Kings Plaza. The line will be half subway, half elevated, and cost $2.3 billion. In conjunction with this extension, Rogers Junction will be fixed by adding a switch right before Nostrand Avenue. Some cost estimates put this at around $300 million. Even though this is pretty expensive, I will use it, as there are no provisions for these switches, and Nostrand Avenue itself would need to be shifted. So the total cost of this will be $2.6 billion. The IBX will no longer be the Interborough Express. It will be the Triborough Express and run to the Bronx. It will feature actual transfers, no street running, and be heavy rail. The MTA estimates the IBX to cost $8 billion, using conventional rail estimates. But again, they are using their own bloated cost estimates, so our cost is $3.2 billion. But that is only between Jackson Heights and Brooklyn. We need to factor the Jackson Heights to the Bronx portion, and that portion probably needs to be deep bore, as you'll be dealing with single track sections in a Hellgate Bridge. Yes, it is going to be expensive, but the benefit of this is that we can make the line go to Yankee Stadium. And also, we can make the IBX go via 74th or 75th Street in order to have a good transfer at Roosevelt. Again, connections, connections, connections. So with this new information, the cost of the Bronx portion will be $6.72 billion. And in total, the TBX will cost $9.92 billion. Queenslink will be built as is, a branch off QBO, and would take over the Far Rockaway branch. According to a Transportation Economics and Management Systems study, Queenslink will cost between $3.4 to $3.7 billion, using the MTA's own bloated 2nd Avenue costs. Since we're not using that, the real cost will be between $1.36 billion to $1.48 billion. I'll go in the middle and say the cost is $1.42 billion. The Southeast Queens Line can take multiple forms. It can either be the Program for Action Plan or be an extension down Merrick Boulevard and Linden Boulevard to 230th Street. Since we have all this money, I'll take the latter to increase coverage of Southeast Queens. This will be an elevated line as there's a high water table in the area. The cost of the Southeast Queens Line is $1.36 billion. The LaGuardia Airport extension will bring Astoria trains to LaGuardia Airport, an airport that lacks good transit access. It has been a dream since 1943, when the city revised the IND second system. The extension will be elevated and cost $2 billion. And finally, the 7 train project involves branching the 7 after Flushing, one to College Point and Bay Terrace, and the other via the Horace Harding Expressway to Bayside. Using a much more detailed cost from Van Schnooken-Ragin, it would be $10.8 billion. However, that is the present day cost, so the real cost is around $4.3 billion. Add in our extension to Bay Terrace, and the total cost is $4.75 billion. The shortlist will also involve 4 regional rail pilots, one on Metro North's Harlem line from Grand Central to Wakefield. The second is the entire LIRR Port Washington branch, and a third is the LIRR Atlantic branch. And a final is on the Penn Access project. Van Schnooken-Ragin estimates for one line to be fully regional rail, meaning fare integration, more frequent service, and more train cars, it will cost a few $100 million. So 4 of them would be around $1 to $2 billion. I'll go in the middle and say $1.5 billion. As for individual lines, we need new infill stations. Metro North's Harlem line will receive infill stations at 149th Street, 168th Street, Claremont Parkway, and 183rd Street, costing about $140 million, using Penn Access costs. The LIRR Port Washington branch will receive 2 infill stations, one at Maspeth for a transfer to the TBX, and the other at Elmhurst. Another station at Corona will wait until ridership patterns shift after the opening of the 2 stations. This will cost $70 million. The Atlantic branch will reopen Woodhaven Junction for a transfer to Queenslink, and another at Setter Manor. This will cost around $65 million. The Penn Access project is the only one, as of recording this video, is under construction, so I won't include the cost, as it is already paid for. But given that it goes through lower income neighborhoods and it parallels the overcrowded 6 train, it should be regional rail. To close out the shortlist, some low-level de-interlining will be made. That includes the F&M swap, the R back to Astoria, the Kolb de-interlining, and a rework of Rogers and 59th Street. Since these changes require no infrastructure, and Rogers de-interlining has been factored in, we will not add additional costs. The shortlist is a transformative project that will redefine how New York City functions as a city. But even with the shortlist, there will still be transit deserts. So onto the shortlist Phase 2, a much more comprehensive project than the first phase. The 6 train extension to Co-op City is a 3-stop elevated extension to Co-op City Boulevard North. Meanwhile, the D train extension to Co-op City is to serve as a crosstown line and end at Bay Plaza. The cost of the 6 train extension is $320 million, while the D train extension will cost $1.85 billion. But this extension is a little too far north. That is where the Fordham Road subway will come into play. It will parallel the BX12 and will be done with deep bore, as the Bronx has major elevation changes. The line will once again end at Bay Plaza in Co-op City, making this station the flagship station in Phase 2. This subway will cost about $4.4 billion. The Franklin Avenue shuttle extension will involve burying the shuttle north of Botanic Garden as a 2-track subway, and extending it 1 stop to Bedford Nostrand Avenues. This extension will cost $1 billion. The next few projects are all related to 2nd Avenue. The first one is the Bronx Super Express. Since MTA planners did not put provisions for express tracks in Phase 1 and Phase 2, we have to dig our express tracks somewhere else. Luckily, we can use 3rd Avenue. All 2nd Avenue trains going further uptown would curve onto 3rd Avenue after 55th Street and make stops at 63rd Street and 125th Street. This project will cost $2.92 billion. But it wouldn't be the Bronx Super Express without the line going to the Bronx. But where? Throgs Neck, as that is the last transit desert we have in the Bronx. The line would be underground, then pop up as an elevated all the way to Harding Avenue in Throgs Neck. This will cost $3.93 billion. Okay, the northern portion is finished. What about the southern portion? Well, after 14th Street, we will curve a pair of tracks to serve Alphabet City. Then the line will run with the BMT Nassau Street line, using the other half of the line that was abandoned in 2004. J trains will end at Chambers Street, while the new 2nd Avenue trains will continue to Brooklyn via the Montague Street Tunnel. These new 2nd Avenue trains would then take over 4th Avenue service to Bay Ridge. Since it is now possible to run more than 21 trains per hour on the whole of 4th Avenue, we can create a branch after 59th Street to Staten Island. The new Staten Island line would run under Forest Avenue and end at South Avenue, Arlington. The cost of all of this is $7.7 billion. Meanwhile, our trains will then use a new tunnel that will connect to the IND Fulton Street line. This will help with connectivity with the IND and BMT networks, especially when there aren't many. This new connection will cost $1.18 billion. To facilitate the Northern Boulevard subway, a new rail tunnel to Queens will be built branching off of 2nd Avenue. This new tunnel would then take over the 11th Street cut and be the sole local service on QBL. 6th Avenue will then be rerouted to a new line along the LIRR main line, and at around Woodside Avenue, this line would branch, with one branch going via Northern Boulevard. This new Northern Boulevard subway would run all the way to Flushing, and take over the 7th branch via the Long Island Expressway. The cost of the new rail tunnel to Queens is $1.15 billion, while the Northern Boulevard line would cost $5.04 billion. The other branch of 6th Avenue would run via the LIRR main line and curve east under Union Turnpike. This Union Turnpike line would run all the way to Northwell Hospital and cost $7.2 billion. The Hillside Avenue extension will first involve a 3-stop extension to Springfield Boulevard. It will then continue via Braddock Avenue and Jericho Turnpike before ending at Floral Park. This extension will be half subway, half elevated, to avoid a high water table in the area, and cost $2.1 billion. The Nostrand Avenue line extension to Manhattan Beach will cover the last remaining transit deserts in southeastern Brooklyn, while also giving a much better terminal. This will be built as half subway, half elevated, due to the high water table in the area, which will cost $1.3 billion. The last two extensions are yard stations. The first one is to extend train service to the Pink Houses. With the R on Fulton and all Rockaway service now being taken over by QBL services, we have enough capacity for an express service to serve this extension. If we use the cost of Harlem 148th Street and adjust it for both inflation and our current construction costs, this extension will cost $120 million. Finally, new lots will be extended 2 stops to Gateway Mall, using existing yard tracks. This will cost $1 billion. Under the shortlist Phase 2, the BMT Eastern Division will be rebuilt. On the Jamaica line, the curves at Essex, Marcy, Alabama, and Crescent Street will be fixed, and Myrtle will be grade separated. Skid Stop will end, and a few stations will be consolidated. Using a similar project in Chicago, the cost will be around $840 million. The L train will also be upgraded. That involves building tail tracks at 8th Avenue, enlarging Atlantic for short turns, and building substations. This will raise capacity on the line from 20 trains per hour to at least 33 trains per hour. This should cost around $600 million. $438 million for the substations, $162 million for the tail tracks. To facilitate all of these new extensions, new yards will be built. Yards at Astoria, Pelham, Cambria Heights, Arlington, Throgs Neck, Metz Willits, and East Flatbush will be built, while 38th Street, Corona, Jamaica, Livonia, Rockaway Park, East New York, and the 240th Street yards will be expanded. Using the inner New Haven yard cost, each yard would cost $156 million. So the total cost would be around $2 billion. We also need to order new trains. Using the 7 trains proportions of service, we need an additional 5,800 train cars. If each train car costs $2.5 million, this means we need to spend $14.5 billion for new trains. To close out the shortlist, elevators will be installed at every single station. All lines will get CBTC, and de-interlining akin to the Van Ude plan will be implemented so that the system runs better. The cost of ADA compliance is $11 billion. The cost of CBTC is around $15.2 billion, and de-interlining will cost around $680 million. The total cost of these improvements is around $27 billion. The total amount we spent on the New York City subway system is $123 billion. 125.7 miles of subway route will be created, which will increase the entire system by 50%. 257 miles of revenue track will be laid, an increase of 39%. This will mark the biggest increase of the New York City subway since the dual contracts of 1913. It will transform the city as more carbon neutral, more equitable, and more affordable. Now, on to the next city, Washington, D.C. The D.C. Metro is an interesting case, as it is the only metro system in the Northeast to consistently expand. Because of this, construction costs can be very low, at around $300 million per mile, but sometimes the cost can be as high as $2.5 billion per mile. So I will still use that 60% cost reduction. For every mile of subway, we pay $1 billion. For every mile of elevated track, we pay $120 million. The first thing I will do is to guarantee 5 years of funding for DC Metro. If you don't know, the DC Metro is facing a $750 million budget crisis because of recent service increases, inflation, and more people working from home. Hopefully, this will give DC Metro more time to work out a sustainable funding solution. And I have confidence in DC to do this, as the person who heads DC Metro, Randy Clark, has done a great job, even though I disagree with some of his takes. Remember that this is the man who increased service 11 times in 1 year, and as a result, DC Metro's ridership has surpassed the Chicago L to be the second most used transit system in the US. But all of this will cost around $11 billion. Now, as for actual construction, the first thing I recommend is a parallel relief line for the Orange Line in the west, as the crowding here is so bad that the locals nickname it the Orange Crush. But where do we put it? Well, Washington Boulevard to the north, or Wilson Boulevard to the south are good candidates. I'll pick the latter as there seems to be more developments in Arlington there, and this relief line will be an express line, only stopping at Ballston and Rosslyn. And I'll also pick the Silver Line to serve this, as it is a very long line. All Silver Line trains will be rerouted to serve this new subway, and will raise throughput in the area from around 18 trains per hour to 39 trains per hour. This extension will be 7.8 miles long and cost $7.8 billion. But once the Silver Line reaches the Potomac River, we will extend it further to relieve the western end of the Orange Line. And a good place to extend it is under M Street. This new extension will continue to parallel the Orange Line and end at Union Station. The cost of this is $4.2 billion. After Union Station, the Silver Line will head south to Oxon Hill. This area is poorly served by Metro, and the bus lines that serve here are among the top 10 most used bus lines in DC. This is why the proposed Blue Line loop runs through here. But the Silver Line would be better, as it would serve top destinations that the Blue Line loop serves, like Rosslyn and downtown, but also serve Tyson's Corner, another top destination. This branch would run under Martin Luther King Drive and 4th Street and cost $7.66 billion. Okay, enough about the Silver Line. Let's talk about the Yellow Line. The Yellow Line is comically short. It used to extend all the way to Greenbelt, but that was cut back to Mount Vernon Square in 2022. Now, to be fair, north of Mount Vernon Square, there really isn't a need for capacity. But still, ending the Yellow Line at Mount Vernon Square is wasteful. If you look at where the green and yellow lines run under, it is 14th Street. 14th Street, 16th Street, and Georgia Avenue are all intensely used bus corridors. So what if we have a 14th Street branch? Yellow Line trains would run under 14th Street all the way to Silver Spring. This extension would cost $4.51 billion. Afterwards, I also proposed the Yellow Line to take over the Red Line portion from Glenmont to Silver Spring. Now, some of you are going to say I'm going too far, but according to census data, these commuters are heading to not only downtown, but also Columbia Heights, which the Yellow Line serves. And also, the Red Line needs capacity, and having the Yellow Line take over the northern section will help divert riders away from the Red Line. This small connection will cost around $100 million and give Yellow Line trains a much-needed yard at Glenmont. In the other direction, the Yellow Line should be extended to National Harbor and meet up with the Silver Line. This extension will provide some circumferential transit in the far south region and cost $530 million. And finally, a circumferential line in the south will be built. It will first run from Ballston to the airport, connecting the orange and silver lines with the blue and yellow lines. After the airport, it would cross the Potomac River and parallel the P12 and W4, two bus routes that are among the top 10 most used bus routes in DC, as they provide circumferential transit in Maryland and Southeast DC. This new line will be completely underground and cost around $19 billion. To close out my proposals, we need to order more rail cars. Using existing proportions, we need to order about 500 rail cars. If each 8000 series costs $2.5 million, that comes out to $1.25 billion. We also need 4 yards. Continuing to use the New York City example, that should come out to around $630 million. All in all, we have spent around $55 billion. 96 miles of track will be laid, and about 48 miles of subway route will be created. This means we have increased DC Metro by almost 50%. And with the new relief lines that parallels the overcrowded orange, red, and green lines, plus an additional circumferential line, this should serve DC for many years to come. Now, on to Boston. Boston has the oldest subway in North America, but the oldest doesn't mean the best. In recent times, the T has fallen into disrepair, with slow zones and unsafe conditions being common. With a new leader, Philip Eng, I have hope that the T can get out of its mess. But given all of this is going to influence how money is going to be spent. The first thing to get the system to a good state of repair is to fix not only every slow zone, but to fix every piece of track. Something akin to the Orange Line shutdown would be the best way to execute this. And using the cost of the shutdown at $189 million, that comes out to $17 million per mile. Now, I don't think this is insane. Even though a similar project in Madrid costs $2.5 million per mile, keep in mind that that section in question was opened in 2007. The T is in horrible shape, thanks to systemic deferred maintenance. So I will use it for the entire network. And using those costs, we will spend around $1.16 billion. The next thing is to pay back the debts that the MBTA was forced to take. If you don't know, when Boston was digging the Big Dig, they forced the MBTA to take on debt from that project. As a result, the MBTA had to defer maintenance, which is why the T is now one of the most dangerous subways in the US. Paying back that debt will get the T back on track, and according to some sources, that is about $10 billion total. So we'll pay that to erase all debts related to the Big Dig. Now, as for actual construction. But what are the costs? Using the proposed red-blue connector, it comes out to $2.04 billion per mile for a subway, and using the Green Line extension, it comes out to $530 million per mile for an above-ground line. Now, I know that the Green Line extension is technically not all above ground, as it follows a railroad right-of-way. But given the fact that other cities like New York also pay around $500 million per mile for elevateds, we will use the $530 million figure here. Give these costs a 60% deduction, and we get $816 million per mile for subways, and $212 million per mile for elevateds. With that being said, let's go over the projects we can pay for. The first thing I like is another central subway. Since the original central subway was constructed in an earlier time, there are a number of at-grade junctions. Combined with the 4 branches, it is a challenge to provide good service to those branches. A solution would be to turn the underground portion of the Silver Line into light rail, and reroute it to Boylston and then under Stewart Street. It would then take over the D and E branches, which will finally remove all at-grade junctions on the subway. This would cost $3.12 billion. With this increase in capacity, we can now resurrect the A branch. The current B branch would be sunk into a tunnel between Kenmore and Packard's Corner, with the A branch branching at Packard's Corner. The A line will be in a tunnel, running partially with the 57 all the way to Newton Square. This branch would cost $3.9 billion. But if the Silver Line is rerouted to the D and E branches, what will serve South End and Roxbury? Well, that is where a new line would go. This line, the Purple Line, would run on Blue Hill Avenue and Washington Street, making express stops, and end at Aquarium Station. A branch of the Purple Line would join Washington Park from Ashmont in order to parallel the 23, a key bus route. The majority of this is underground, with only a small portion after Mattapan being above ground. All of this will cost $8 billion and fulfill the promise that the MBTA made to Washington Street residents when the L was torn down in 1987. The Purple Line would then continue north, but where? Well, Chelsea and Revere are two areas where rail transit is lacking and has multiple key bus routes, like the 111, 116, and 117. So the Purple Line should head up to Chelsea, with one branch via the 111 that is half elevated, and the other partially via the 116 and 117 to Squire Road. These two branches will cost $6.5 billion. Next up is the Red Line extension to Arlington. This will provide rapid transit access to Arlington, as opposed to the overcrowded 77 bus. This extension will follow the bike path and cost $2.7 billion. A Red Line branch will be built to Watertown, following the 71 and 73 buses. This will serve Mount Auburn and Watertown, and cost $3 billion. Next up is the Red-Blue Connector. This will extend the Blue Line one stop to Charles and MGH, and Bowdoin Station will be closed. With this, all lines will be connected with one another, and overcrowded stations like Park Street will see relief. This will cost $340 million. The southern leg of the E branch will be put in a tunnel, with stop consolidation. Then the E branch will be extended all the way to Mattapan. This will be tunneled to Forest Hills, then elevated to Mattapan, and cost around $3 billion. Continuing in the south, the Orange Line will be extended to Dedham, while a second branch will start at Forest Hills and run to Hyde Park. The Dedham branch will be underground, while the Hyde Park branch will be elevated. This will cost $4.1 billion. Finally, to finish off every T proposal, the Urban Ring will be built. This will provide much-needed circumferential transit in Boston and connect Roxbury, Allston, Kenmore, Cambridge, Chelsea, and the airport without going to downtown. This will all be underground and cost $16.2 billion. Now, as for regional rail, we will fund the North-South Rail Link. This will help provide through service in Boston and allow all Boston commuters to choose which station they would like to commute from. Since we have all this money, we will choose the most ambitious proposal, the 4-track option. This will cost $22 billion according to a 2018 study, but under our cost revisions will cost $8.8 billion. To finalize our proposals, new rolling stock and yards would need to be built. Using current proportions, we need 105 Type 10 LRTs and about 600 new subway cars. This comes out to $2.52 billion. We also need new yards, 9 of them to be exact. And again, using the New Haven Inner Yard example, comes out to $1.41 billion. In total, we spent about $75 billion. 66.5 route miles and 133 track miles will be added to the T, while 1.22 route miles and 4.88 track miles will be added to the regional rail system. This will double the size of the T, and under this proposal, every key bus route will have a rail line paralleling it. These new lines will serve Boston for the next 100 years. Our final major city is Philadelphia. The subway and trolley system here is not very extensive, but the real value is regional rail, where it covers every inch of Philadelphia. So my proposals will focus more on regional rail than subways. The first thing is to make every branch run every 15 minutes during peak times and every 20 minutes during off-peak times, and have fair integration with the rest of the SEPTA network. While it is hard to calculate the cost of these service increases, we will first cover the $240 million budget hole that SEPTA is facing. Then, using our regional rail estimates from New York and expanding that to the entirety of SEPTA, it would cost around $5 billion. The next thing we will do is to re-extend SEPTA branches, with all extensions being double-tracked. And according to the Westchester Extension study, that comes out to $645 million, or about $70 million per mile. Apply our 60% reduction, and that comes out to $28 million per mile. Our first extension is currently being pursued, and is none other than the Media Line to Westchester. This will re-extend the line to Westchester and cost $260 million. Our next extension is the Wyomissing branch. This branch will branch off the Norristown line and run all the way to Wyomissing, stopping at Spring City, Saratoga, and Redding, and will cost $1.24 billion. Our next extension is the Norristown line extension to Lansdale. This will cover towns like Norriton and Acorn, and cost about $290 million. Our next extension is a long one. It is the Allentown branch and involves branching the Doylestown line at Lansdale and running all the way to Allentown. This will cost $1.05 billion. Our next extension will extend the Warminster line to New Hope, and this will cost around $490 million. Our final SEPTA Regional Rail extension will extend the Fox Chase line to Newtown. This will cost $420 million. We aren't done with regional rail yet. To the south, there is New Jersey Transit. New Jersey Transit down here isn't as extensive, nor is it convenient. However, there are old railroad rights-of-way perfect for commuter rail. And Alan Fisher's plan would create a branch of the main tunnel at 8th Street and make it travel underneath the Delaware River. When the line reaches Camden, New Jersey, this line would branch in all sorts of directions, serving a vast swath of southern New Jersey. But since we have all this money, let's go one step further. This tunnel will not be a simple branch, but its own exclusive line, traveling to 30th Street Station. Once the line reaches there, it would take over some branches to the west, freeing up capacity on other western branches. The cost of the tunnel portion is $5.6 billion, using the East Side Access costs, while the branch reactivation projects will cost around $6.42 billion. Now, onto the subways. The first thing I propose is a Roosevelt Boulevard subway. This subway would branch from the Broad Street line and run on Roosevelt Boulevard all the way to Neshaminy. This will cover a large portion of Northeast Philly and cost between $4.65 billion and $6.33 billion, using the 2003 study, as that is more honest than the current 2022 study. There is no reason why the current costs should be similar to Phase 1 of the 2nd Avenue subway, when the road is designed for future mass transit use and is not located in dense Manhattan. Anyway, I'll go in the middle and say the subway cost $5.49 billion, which comes out to less than $500 million per mile. Since that is very reasonable, I won't apply the 60% deduction. In conjunction with the Roosevelt Boulevard subway, the Market Frankford line will be extended one stop to Roosevelt Boulevard, which will help provide new connections with this new subway. This will cost around $150 million if we use the JFK AirTrain example. Next up is the Market Frankford branch to Whitman Plaza. This will run on 6th Street and parallel the 47, the most used bus route in the city. Using the Roosevelt Boulevard costs, the branch would cost $1.03 billion. We will also build a new line on the west side of Philadelphia. This line would start in the south and run under 21st and 22nd Streets. In the north, the line would branch, with one to Cedar Brook Plaza and the other to Roxborough. This will help fill in transit deserts in the western portion of the city, and cost $8.66 billion. The final line we will build is, of course, a circumferential line. This line would run on Girard, 56, in Oregon, thus paralleling two of the most used corridors in the city, the 15 and the G. To the east, the line would run under Aramingo Avenue as opposed to under the highway, which will serve more people. This line would cost $7.77 billion. Since all of the regional rail projects that we included already included the cost of yard expansions and extra rolling stock, we will skip them. As for the subways, we need an additional 915 rail cars and 4 yards. If each rail car costs around $1.585 million, we need to spend $1.45 billion. If we use the Inner New Haven Yard example, we need to spend $630 million. In total, we spent around $46 billion. The subway network has more than tripled, from 22.9 to 77 route miles. As for regional rail, 325 miles of route will be created, which will effectively double the size of the regional rail network. This will not only transform Philadelphia, but also the area around it. decreasing traffic and therefore CO2 emissions. Now, let's talk about some honorable mentions from smaller cities. In Baltimore, we will fund the Red Line. The Red Line will be the first east-west rail corridor in Baltimore and cost $2.8 billion. In Pittsburgh, we will fund the Spine Line, a rail proposal that will link the highest density areas of Pittsburgh to the rest of the light rail system. This will cost $1.18 billion, adjusted for both inflation and our construction costs. In Albany, we'll fund the Central Avenue LRT. This will run in the very center of Albany, serving a ton of density, and cost $3.56 billion. In New Haven, we'll fund a rail link between Union Station, downtown, and Yale University. But unlike the streetcar design, we will go with a more grade-separated design, which will cost around $240 million if we go for an elevated design. Finally, in Providence, we will fund a rail line on routes 1 and 2, stretching from Warwick through downtown and finally out to Pawtucket and Central Falls. It will be elevated minus a short downtown tunnel and cost around $3.1 billion. In conclusion, we spent around $310 billion, which makes up around 36% of the military budget. However, we only focus on transit systems in the Northeast and have like 70% of the country to go. Since this video is already very long, I am going to end this video here and work out separate versions for the South, Midwest, and Pacific regions of the country. So stay tuned for that. And with that, this marks the end of this video. What do you think about my selections? Did I miss any proposals? Or do you think some of the proposals should be struck down? Let us know in the comments below. And if I do end up liking a few proposals, I might make a follow-up video to this. And also, if you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.